My name is Adriel Desotels. I am the CEO and founder of Netragard, and I'm here to talk with you about my experiences as a zero-day exploit broker. If you have any questions, since this is pre-recorded thanks to COVID, you can shoot me tweets. I am Gray Brimstone. It's GREYBRIMSTONE, and I'll get back to you as I can. So Netragard was founded in 2006 on the premise of delivering high quality, research driven offensive and defensive security services to our customers. Our two primary lines of service are realistic threat penetration testing and vulnerability research. The realistic threat penetration testing is specifically designed to produce a level of threat that slightly exceeds that which our customers are likely to face in a real world scenario. Our philosophy is that by testing at an elevated level of threat, we are able to produce methods for remediation that will help our customers become much more secure. Testing at less than realistic levels of threat obviously doesn't do much to advance security. The vulnerability research arm of our company is still in play today, but we are no longer selling zero-day exploits, although we do quite a bit of research. The vulnerability research portion of our company now is really focused on helping customers harden their own technology. So I know that most of you know what a zero-day is, but I figured that just in case there was somebody in the audience that didn't know, it would be good to provide a quick definition. So zero-day is a software vulnerability that is undisclosed to the public and really only known to a select few. They're called zero-day because the targets that they go after have 0 days in which they can plan for or build mitigations or defenses. This is desirable for certain offensive players because one, if there's no time to plan for a defense, you're indefensible. And two, because these exploits are brand new and they're generally novel, the methods for detecting them are not there, so they can often go covert. Now, we began producing zero days back in 1998, maybe a little bit earlier. We were initially driven by curiosity, but that curiosity turned into profit pretty quickly. The profit happened in about 2001 when our team was doing research against iTunes. We found a zero-day in iTunes and ended up selling that to one of our buyers for $16,000. This is a buyer that we sold other kinds of technology to, and we were really surprised just by the amount of money that we could get for an MP3 that contained an exploit. Of course, that made us think, well, they're willing to spend that kind of money on an MP3 with an embedded exploit. Wonder what they'd be willing to spend on something more interesting. And that's really the thing that triggered the creation of this whole program. Now, as time progressed, Snowsoft began offering 2 services and a single product. The services were research-driven red team penetration testing, which today at Netragard we're calling realistic threat penetration testing. And the second was zero-day vulnerability research and exploit development. The zero-day vulnerability research and exploit development services, other than just producing zero-day vulnerabilities, were also used as a part of our customers' quality assurance process. We'd effectively be injected into their software development lifecycle, which would enable us to perform research against their software, report findings, and would enable them to harden their software by resolving those findings before the software was ever released to their customers. The third thing that we did in Snowsoft was to build something called Anvil. Anvil was an Apex network vulnerability and intrusion logger, which was effectively a SIM that was really advanced for its time. Anvil would take feeds in from intrusion detection engines, automated vulnerability scanners, system logs, and agents that were planted on systems that would do things like file system integrity monitoring. Anvil would take alerts or triggers and correlate against them to produce actionable items. The concept behind Anvil was to help cut down on all of the noise that you would generally get for an intrusion prevention system and to help eliminate security fatigue. It was pretty good at doing that. In about 2004, Anvil was acquired by a third party along with all of the IP associated with it, and so Snowsoft ceased operations. In early 2006, kind of skipping ahead, a few things happened that led to the founding of Netragard, the current company. The most prominent of those two were, first, that we were approached by an organization that had the intent and the funding to purchase a high volume of zero-day exploits. And the second was a former customer of ours, Snowsoft, approached me asking for what he called a realistic threat penetration test. He claimed that he couldn't find another vendor that would deliver realistic threat penetration testing, and asked us to help him out. Well, we did some research, and we also couldn't find vendors that would operate at realistic levels of threat. So we threw together the service and incorporated Netragard to satisfy both of these needs. So as Netragard continued to operate, our zero-day program evolved into what we eventually called the Exploit Acquisition Program, or EAP. This program was created for two primary reasons. The first was we knew that security researchers were being paid pennies on the dollar for their hard work. We knew that they would work hours, sometimes weeks, maybe even a month or two, just to build a really clean, almost artistic zero-day exploit, but they might fetch $5,000, $10,000 for that work. We knew that we could pay them a lot more through our program, and we frankly thought they deserved it. The other part was we realized that we could increase revenue by crowdsourcing, and so this is one of the main concepts behind EAP. We realized that we could increase revenue by crowdsourcing research and selling the work of other researchers to other buyers, or really brokering it. The crowdsourcing concept was set up so that we were very much a middleman. Researchers would approach us, we would protect their identity, and we would provide a method for bidding so that our buyers could see what it was that they had produced. We would also protect our buyers' identity, and we would work to help the researchers and the buyers come to an agreement. When the agreement was reached, we would facilitate the execution and transfer of funds and so on. Initially, we began finding new zero-day researchers via word of mouth. We would publish articles or emails to places like Full Disclosure and so on. But we also began finding researchers through some of our buyers. Our buyers often didn't feel comfortable with or didn't want to work with researchers directly. So when a researcher would approach them, they would redirect that researcher to us, and we would take over the relationship and take over the process. It turned out to be a pretty effective way of doing things. The first challenge that we had, of course, is something that people asked about a lot. It was, how do you know that the researchers that you're working for are good guys and not bad guys? Well, we certainly didn't want to be paying bad guys, high dollar value for the work, especially if these guys were criminals or somehow affiliated with some kind of terrorist organization. We wanted to make sure that we kept EAP as above board, ethical, and just straight shooting as possible. It's really important to the people on our team, and me in particular, that what we do is for the greater good and isn't something that's going to bring harm to innocent people. So we spent a lot of time verifying and vetting the researchers that we worked with. We would refuse anybody really quickly if they were asking us to pay them via cryptocurrency, because to us that was a sign that they were trying to stay anonymous. We would refuse anybody that was unwilling to provide two proofs of identity. One would generally be a passport, and the second would be some kind of state identification like a driver's license, something similar. And we would also refuse anybody that didn't pass the various checks that we ran, which included but weren't always limited to background checks. We're pretty thorough with this kind of work, and I've got to say, in the history of running this program, we've never had any issue with any of our researchers in terms of ethics, contractual obligations, etc. They've all been great. So as time progressed, we amassed a pretty good number of highly capable and really trustworthy security researchers. These researchers would produce multiple submissions per year on average, and a single submission could fetch as little as $40,000 to well over $100,000. The exclusivity of the submission was controlled by the needs of our buyers. If an exclusive sale was requested, the researcher could fetch 3 to 5 times what they would get for a non-exclusive sale. If a non-exclusive sale was requested, which was the standard, almost always, in fact, the standard, then the researcher would retain their intellectual property, but would promise not to disclose that in any way that would result in the 0-day being burnt. Another thing that would happen with the non-exclusive sales were that we would try to resell to other buyers, and as we resold, we would pay the researchers when buyers acquired this item from us. So non-exclusive and exclusive both had their benefits. The price per 0-day did increase year to year, and we suspect that that's because of competition. We also suspect that it's because technology becomes increasingly secure as time goes by. The harder something is to hack, the better off you're going to be in terms of price, because it's going to take more time or work. So there was a murky problem, and this is a problem that we almost always knew about, but didn't really know what to do about it. And that problem was this. So our reputation as exploit brokers was no secret. In fact, I made it a point to be as overt as I could be without really, giving away stuff that was confidential. We still try to be really open today about how we worked, hence why I'm putting this presentation together and why I'm willing to answer questions so openly. The press that we received did draw in a lot of new customers, prospective customers, as well as researchers. And it wasn't particularly difficult to vet researchers, but it became increasingly difficult to vet new customers. So we were only interested in customers that we thought were trying to fight the good fight. For example, groups that were looking to fight child pornography, human trafficking, domestic and foreign terrorism, or people that were looking to support our troops overseas and things like that. So I once told a reporter that was interviewing me about our 0-day program that if any of our 0-day ended up in the hands of bad people because we sold to the wrong buyer, that I'd terminate the exploit acquisition program. To me, if that had ever happened, it would mean that our vetting process for our buyers was just not working. And it would mean that we couldn't trust our ability to control the sale of our own 0-day to the good guys. So in 2015, when the hacking team breach happened and their customer data was exposed, I kept my word. I terminated the exploit acquisition program really without hesitation. Now, I was really disappointed that we reached that point because we could no longer trust our own ability to verify our buyers. That really kind of struck me personally because I really enjoyed knowing that I was able to help people fight the good fight, as I thought. I was, however, really happy that the hacking team had been breached because it did two things. So first, the breach exposed that the one and only 0-day that we sold to hacking team, which was called Redshift, was burnt. What that really means is that the tool was exposed to the public, published, however you want to call it, and as a result, it was no longer viable in the market. The other thing that I was happy about was the breach exposed the true nature of hacking team and also exposed their customer base. And we saw their customer base and we saw who the technology was going to and where our technology could have potentially gone. It made the decision of shutting down the exploit acquisition program just that much more solid. It's really important to understand that 0-day exploits themselves are not malicious. A lot of people think, oh, zero day, it's like a nuke, or it's a piece of malware, or it's something dangerous or malicious, but that's ignorance. Um, in all reality, zero-day exploits are just pieces of software. They're tools that can be used for good or bad. The same exploit that could be used to unmask a child pornographer is a tool that could be used to steal a lot of money from a financial institution or cause a lot of damage. They're all good and bad at the same time. The nature of the tool in terms of ethics is only attributable to the human element. So if a human's a good person and they have zero day, they can do great things. If they're not, they can do terrible things. Ethical uses of zero days, like I said previously, or include, but are hardly limited to, combating child pornography, human trafficking, terrorism, overseas operations, even helping to build better defensive systems. There's all kinds of things you can do that are good with zero day. Sadly, the media and a lot of people in general like to sensationalize zero day and create FUD, fear, uncertainty, and doubt. That's why if you read, all kinds of articles, they're talking about zero days as if they're weapons of mass destruction, or they're terribly powerful. They're really not as crazy as people make them sound. So this is something that I'm sure a lot of you are going to cringe at, but bear with me and try to understand where this is coming from, because this is an unpopular fact, or truth, as I put it here. So first things first, zero-day exploits do not put the masses at risk, like a lot of people seem to think. They're not used to hack your grandmother. They're not used to infect computer systems en masse. They're just not used for wide-scale attacks. The reason being is they're expensive, and when you use an exploit to compromise many, many, many systems, the exploit is going to get burnt. It's going to get detected, and somebody's going to identify what's going on. The vendor will become aware of it. The vulnerability will get published. It's burnt. The truth is actually that a zero-day exploit is safer than a published exploit. And this is where people kind of get upset. So a good example of this is the MS-17010 vulnerability that was made public only after it was stolen from the NSA. Prior to that vulnerability being stolen and published, that vulnerability had very little impact in the world as a whole. And we know this because there were no news stories about it. People weren't being hacked on a large scale by it. If they were, they likely would have detected it and reported it. However, after MS-17010 became public knowledge, it became a different story. So the first thing that happened was that Microsoft created a patch for the vulnerability. That actually happened really quickly, so good job, Microsoft. But shortly after that, North Korea created a piece of ransomware that we called WannaCry. WannaCry leveraged the MS-17010 vulnerability again after the patch was created and after the patch was released by Microsoft. And that once required ransomware went everywhere, infected hospitals, infected financial institutions, caused all kinds of problems for all kinds of people. And the reason why is because people didn't patch. They didn't patch because either they didn't have time, they didn't patch because it wasn't a part of their regular schedule. They didn't patch. And what's even scarier is today, delivering penetration testing services, we will still come across MS-17010 once in a while. So really, a vulnerability that's only known to a few, i.e. a zero day, presents far less risk than a vulnerability that's known to many, because when you arm many, you're arming the bad guys. I wish that wasn't the case, because I know the idea of performing vulnerability research and notifying a vendor so they can create a patch and then releasing advisory is a feel-good idea because you feel like you're protecting people, but that just doesn't seem to be the case, and that's what the evidence points to. So another thing that I talk a lot about is the framework for 0 days. So people ask me, well, would you want, the 0-day exploit market to be regulated? And my answer is yes, but not regulated in the same way that people try to do it with a Wassenaar arrangement. So I'm in full support of the creation for an effective framework that ensures that those who purchase 0-day exploits are somehow licensed to a standard of ethical use and distribution. And I want built into that framework some method of recourse. So if, for example, you sell to a vendor and that vendor promises in both writing and verbally that their tools will only be provided to good guys, and they violate that promise, that you have bona fide recourse. Right now, as it exists, people can say anything, and if you're dealing with people overseas, good luck with any kind of recourse for a 0-day that you sold to them that ended up in the wrong hands. What I'm not in favor of is a legal framework like that, which was being proposed under the Wassenaar arrangement. I'm not in favor of any regulation around performing 0-day vulnerability research or sharing 0-day exploits or information with anybody. The reason for that is if you do try to regulate the distribution of 0 days or the associated research, you're going to hinder the ability of organizations to perform effective incident response. For example, what Wassenaar wanted to do is say, hey, before a 0-day leaves the United States, it has to go through a vetting process that's controlled by the government. So suppose company, Acme Corporation were compromised and a piece of malware was found on their system that contained a 0-day. Well, that company would not be able to take that piece of malware and ship it off to their team in Italy to do research, or their team in France or wherever. What they would have to do is they would have to first pass it to the government and wait 2, 3, 4 months for the government to approve the transmission, then send it off to the branch overseas that maybe does the research. In cases like that, time is of the essence. It already takes far too long for people to recognize that they've been breached. So I think that any regulation that comes into play has to be a regulation that helps to facilitate speed and doesn't hinder research. Moreover, vulnerability research is important. I mean, it's really helped to shape this industry. It's really helped to drive things forward. So I really want to make sure that that aspect is protected. So the question that I get a lot from a lot of people after the hacking team incident is this: would I get back into the 0-day market today if I could? And the answer is yes, absolutely, I get back into the market. The reasons are plentiful. Like I'd mentioned a few times already, I like fighting the good fight. I like the idea of being able to take on human trafficking, child pornography, things like that. Those things just make my blood boil. I think that in order for me to get back into the market, though, we'd have to have a framework that held buyers accountable. I think that'd be absolutely important. I also think that we are in the middle of an arms war, but people, average people, normal people, citizens, people who don't do this kind of work, don't see it. If the United States stops with its 0-day vulnerability research and its exploit acquisition programs and shuts down its 0-day market and so on, we will be less capable than our enemies from an offensive perspective. And I'm already afraid that's happening because the views right now in this country towards 0 days in general are really surrounded by fear. People don't understand what they are, so it becomes really hard to operate. I think that needs to be addressed as well. So the short of it is, yes, I would absolutely get back into it if I could do it in a way that I knew was ethical and that I knew enabled me to protect the people that deserve protecting and to keep the tools and the technology in the hands of the good guys. So that's the end of my presentation. I hope it was good, and I'm sorry for COVID because I generally like to interact I'm actually surprised that I managed to get this done in 26 minutes and 30 seconds. Generally, I talk far too long, so I can stay on a slide for a good 20 minutes, and I go 20 minutes over my allotted time. But anyways, it's been fun to talk about this, and I look forward to receiving questions. So by all means, again, tweet me, Gray Brimstone, it's GREYBRIMSTONE, or email me, it's Adriel, ADRIEL, @netragard.com. Thank you.